I haven't ever planned anything. It's just more like, this looks interesting, I'll go and do that and see what happens. And I've done that my whole life.
So if you're building a tunnel or something, you'll need all the tools to understand.
That's right. Well, it's many and varied. So sometimes it's the tools that we use to design those things, but sometimes, more often than not, with my part of the business, it's been more about doing things like environmental monitoring. So when you're building a tunnel like Melbourne Metro and you're digging underneath buildings and near people's apartments, you need to measure noise, air quality and vibration. And the EPA puts in these things called environment performance regulations that specify how much noise or vibration you can do on every site and what hours are, and there's really complicated measurements around that. So we've put in all the telemetry, all of the devices, and hooked them all up so you get real-time measurements and then measure them against these performance requirements so you can alert people when we're getting close to thresholds that will result in penalties. And penalties can be things like relocating entire apartment buildings and relocating people.
Huh. What do you mean?
So if you make enough noise during the night outside a high-rise apartment building, we have to relocate those people.
And pay for it.
The government pays for it. But we get penalised.
Because they'll then charge you.
Yes. I don't know the details of what the penalties are, but basically we have to make sure that doesn't happen. That's our job, is make sure that that doesn't happen.
Interesting. And how long has that been a thing for, strict regulations around that?
For a long time. And for Melbourne Metro, it started when construction started, so that'd be 5, 6, 7 years ago. We've been doing that all along.
Yeah. But presumably 100 years ago it was just build, make as much noise as you want.
No one cared. No. This is it's reasonably recent because there were so many complaints, as you can imagine. If you're digging a big tunnel outside someone's house or outside their apartment building, they don't get any sleep, or their building is vibrating to the point where could cause structural damage, then people get very upset about that and they contact their local members and politicians and the whole thing blows up. So the EPA got involved to put in all these regulations to regulate the way these things are managed and done.
And this goes on globally, basically?
Absolutely. In developed countries anyway, it's pretty much the same. It goes under different names, but yeah, certainly if you look at the UK HS2, same sort of thing. Same type of monitoring, exactly, same sort of regulations.
Huh. So you oversee these projects globally?
Yeah, I don't oversee them globally. I make sure that we share the information that we get here and in other jurisdictions and leverage it around the world. So part of my job is making sure that we leverage the things that we develop in one country and use them in a different country and vice versa.
Got it. Okay, so let's go back to the start.
The start. Yes.
How you grew up.
Yeah. So I was born July 31st, 1960 in Melbourne in the Queen Victoria Hospital, right in the centre of Melbourne. I'm the son of refugees. My mother was interned at Auschwitz when she was 19. I'm Jewish. My mother survived Auschwitz.
How long was she there for?
She was there for 4 years.
Wow. Yeah,
she was one of the very few survivors from Auschwitz.
And she went in at
19 years old.
And had she shared a lot of...
No, she never talked about it at all. I mean, one can only imagine the horrors that she saw and endured while she was in there. But yes, she managed to survive and was really quite, mentally affected by that. She was pretty, always found it difficult, I think, life in general after that.
So where did she go after Auschwitz?
She met my father. So my father escaped when Germany invaded Poland in 1939. He was a communist and decided to join the Red Army. So he and two of his brothers went through Poland at night and went to what was then the Soviet Union and joined the Red Army. So my father was in the Red Army during the Second World War.
Wow. So they would just take people?
Yeah, especially communists. My father had been in jail in Warsaw prior to the Germany invading Poland, and as they invaded, they released all political prisoners, and my father and two brothers went to the Soviet Union and joined the army there and fought for the Russians.
And did he talk much about it?
Yeah, he did. He was a young man, and I think he had quite an okay time of it, really. They trained him as a welder, so he sort of got a bit of training while he was in the army. And I think for him it was not nearly as traumatic an experience, but it certainly cured him of communism. Certainly that was the end of his flirtation with communism, I think, by the end there.
How did that play out?
Well, he was always much more, I'd say, more to the right of centre, I would say, after that experience.
Because he just thought it's...
How corrupt it was from what he saw and the way things worked in the Soviet Union. He could see all the corruption and how bad it was for people there, and I think he just gave up on it completely after that.
Did he learn Russian?
Yeah, he spoke Russian and obviously Polish, Yiddish. He also later life learned a bit of Italian and Greek and English.
And was your mum was from Poland as well?
Yeah, they're both born in Warsaw.
Huh.
And both grew up there.
And where did they end up meeting after the war?
They met in Lodz, or Łódź in Polish, and got married there in 1946. I'm not sure how they actually met, but they somehow met up, got married, and then shortly thereafter moved to Paris. My father was one of 13 children, and his eldest sister, who was basically the one who brought him up, had moved to Paris in 1933, so well before the Second World War. And they decided to go and move to Paris. And so they lived there for about 5 years.
And what were they doing immediately after the war? Like, did your mum have family to go back to? Or?
There was no one left. Everyone in her family had been murdered by the Nazis.
In Auschwitz?
I'm not sure whether it was Auschwitz or one of the other concentration camps, but pretty much she had no one left by the end of the war.
And so where did she just ended up going back to that town?
Displaced person. She went back to Warsaw, as most refugees did, but I don't know if you've seen any pictures of Warsaw after the war. There wasn't that much left. It was completely bombed out. There was almost nothing left. And so I'm not sure the sequence of events of when they both went back to Warsaw and how they ended up getting married. I just don't know that part of it. I've got all the records, but that doesn't tell you the story behind it. It just gives you a chronological summary of where they were. I've got their marriage certificate when they got married in Lodz. And then they went to Paris. And you can imagine, it was pretty traumatic.
Yeah.
Sort of period. Yeah, terrible.
Yeah, like coming out of the camp and it's just the world
Chaos.
Is a totally different place.
Yeah.
And
everything you know and all the people you know have gone. Everything's been destroyed, even the city you grew up in. There's almost nothing left of it. I mean, Warsaw was just a pile of rubble, basically.
And what about your dad's family?
So he had his sister in Paris and he had 3 brothers that survived. And that was about it. The rest of them were all murdered as well.
So then they ended up in Paris.
They ended up in Paris and lived there. And then there was a lot, they couldn't get citizenship in Paris. So it was very difficult for refugees, particularly Jewish refugees, to find a place to go. It was, it was why the State of Israel came about because there were so many people with nowhere to go, and there was always the Israel, but they didn't want to go there, and they got sponsorship from people in Melbourne. So the Jewish community that was quite well established here sponsored lots of Jewish refugees to come here. Interestingly, I did find something from the Brazilian government that offered my parents to go and live in Brazil as well. My mother had a cousin there, one of the last remains of her families, but they decided to come here, and they came here in 1952.
And so how long had the Jewish community been established in Melbourne?
Oh, a long time. There were Jews on the First Fleet. So there's been a Jewish community here.
Coming from England?
Yeah. There's been Jews here from the very, very beginning. But there was a lot of growth. A lot of Jews emigrated here after the Russian pogroms in the late 19th century as well. So there was a lot of Jews came here. So there was always a Jewish community here from the beginning. And they really rallied to get as many people from Europe out here as they possibly could.
Why was that?
Because they're Jews, fellow Jews, and these were people who had, had their lives destroyed, and so helped them come out here.
And why did your parents not want to go to Israel, do you know?
I don't think they were really up for more wars and fighting and more hardship by that stage. I think they just wanted to go somewhere where they could start a new life. My sister had been born by then too. So my sister was born in Paris while they were there. So, by the time... And the Korean War, looked like breaking out. So they kind of thought... And there was talk that, Europe might get involved, there might be another war, and they thought Australia would be a safe place, and they had the opportunity to come here. Yeah. So that was kind of, I think, their thinking at the time.
And then how long after they were here were you born?
So they came here in 52, I was born in 60. Yeah. And
what was their life like here?
Well, you can imagine my mother was 40 when she had me. I think my father was 46. They came here with almost nothing and had to sort of start again, and, no English to speak of, so they had to learn English. My father worked, like a lot of Jews that emigrated here, in the rag trade. It was a huge... Back in the day, Melbourne had an enormous manufacturing sector in clothing and textiles. And a lot of Jews went into that area, including my father. And so he worked, for other people. Then he set up a pleating business, putting folds in women's skirts. In Brunswick Street.
Wow.
Yeah. So he bought a building there in, I think it was 1954. I think it was something like that. It's not long after they arrived.
Wow, he bought a building?
Yeah, in Fitzroy, which at that stage, it's not like Fitzroy today. It was the, very working class, very poor area, and buildings were incredibly cheap. That's why he bought it here.
And what was your mum doing?
She worked with him in the factory, pleating.
So that was the fashion at the time?
Well, pleating was fashionable for a long time. You've got to remember, Australia had a protected economy then. We didn't really trade a lot. Everything was manufactured and sold here. Cars, everything was made here. The Australian economy didn't open up until the 1980s to the world. So we had a protected economy. So pleating sort of went in and out of fashion. So at various times, he did really, really well. And other times when pleating went out of fashion, life was not so good. So it was very up and down, for the family, I think, like that.
And where were you living?
By then, they were living in South Caulfield. When they first came here, they lived in Northcote. And then they moved to South Caulfield. By the time I was born, they lived in North Caulfield. And so I grew up in that house that they bought the same year. I think they bought that house the same year I was born.
So they came and started working hard and were doing well.
Yeah.
For themselves to be able to...
Well, they did. well enough, yeah. Yeah, they did well enough. And, their whole lives, like a lot of migrants, their lives are about creating a better existence for their children. So I think there was always a lot of pressure on my sister and I to get a good education. That was their reason for living.
Mm-hmm. And what did you speak at home?
They spoke Yiddish mostly. So, my sister and I were quite, we could understand everything in Yiddish. My sister, being a bit older and having grown up in Paris, could speak Yiddish much better than I could. But I could understand every word, and I used to answer them in English. And when they didn't, they also spoke Polish amongst themselves, especially if they didn't want us to understand what they were talking about. They'd speak Polish. My sister's understanding of Polish is quite reasonable, or it used to be anyway.
And were there lots of other Polish Jews in the community?
Huge numbers, and a very vibrant, community. So Ackland Street used to be full of Eastern European Jews. And you could go down there on a Saturday and Sunday and there'd be groups sit in the street talking Yiddish, eating at cafes there, drinking coffee. They all used to meet up there. So there was this really huge community of Eastern European Jews that had emigrated to Melbourne that used to get together.
Is that in Caulfield?
St Kilda.
And were there more Orthodox people or it was like just a mix? Or
it was, certainly around with my parents' group, they were people who were more secular than religious. So to the extent that most of them grew up in a religious environment back in Poland, but by the time they'd been through the Second World War, a lot of these people had really given up on formal religion. They still identified as culturally Jewish, but not in the sense of going to synagogue and doing all the things that Orthodox Jews do.
Mm-hmm.
So it was quite different. That's not to say all of them were like that, but certainly amongst my parents' friends, they were pretty much all like that. I mean, we'd be lucky to go to synagogue once or twice a year. It just wasn't a big thing.
Huh. And then presumably there's another part of the community that's more religious.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Well, like you see in any religion, you get sort of, everything from progressive right through to ultra-Orthodox and anything in between. There's lots of little factions of Judaism, even in a city like Melbourne.
Yeah. But where would they... So I'm thinking of does it come from Russian traditions? When, the dress and the hat and
the ultra-Orthodox, mainly Poland and Russia. Yeah.
And would they have already been in Australia pre-World War II?
I don't think so. They're probably a phenomenon of World War II as well, but I'm not sure of that, because I've never really had anything to do with that side of the community.
Yeah.
And I've never had any huge interest in it either, so I haven't really looked into it. It's not kind of my bag, so yeah. I've never been that interested.
This was like my Jewish friends in New York that I worked with, and because you see a lot of in Williamsburg, and I would always be like, what, do you know about these people, what? And they're like, Julia, stop asking me, don't know anything about them. And
they're very insular, so you don't really get any real insight into how they work or what their motivations are or anything like that. I mean, you probably know as much as I do, to be honest. I don't really know much about how they work. They're very tightly knit, though.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. So, and were your parents happy in Australia?
Yeah, I think they were happy, yeah. I mean, I think they were happy because they could create a better life. And after all the turmoil that they'd been through, to be somewhere where they could work, bring up children, have a life, have a community, I think they were reasonably happy. Yeah, they worked very hard, though. I mean, it wasn't only my parents would work. My father in particular would often be working well into the night, taking rolls of material out to places, people to do piecework at night. And he'd work at Saturdays usually till lunchtime. And they didn't take many holidays that I can recall. Not for a long time, anyway.
Mm.
Yeah. Very, very work-oriented, because they had no choice. It was the only way they could live.
Yeah. And for you, you understood that they wanted you to get a good education then?
It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a discussion. It was understood that my sister and I would go to university and we would be successful.
Huh.
It was never a topic that was discussed. There was never any options. Never felt like there were any options anyway.
And for them, they understood that's how you could have a life that was...
Yeah, but I think that's true for any immigrant group even today. Education is the key to a better life. If you come from a poor background or a migrant background, the only thing you can do is get an education, because that's the only way you're going to have a better life.
And so what was your childhood like growing up in Caulfield?
It was good. I mean, I didn't have much in what I'd call parental oversight. I always felt like I could do whatever I like, whenever I like. So I think there were periods where I did run amok, and wasn't perhaps the best behaved or the best child I could have been, because I was pretty reckless. And
what kind of things?
Just staying up late, alcohol, marijuana. Certainly a fair bit of that going on for a long time. Various other illicit substances, which I won't go into.
Maybe this is why Nadia was worried about us having this conversation.
Quite possibly. But, underneath it all, I was always a really good student. I really enjoyed studying and I really loved doing it. But outside of that, I would, and I loved sport too, I must say. I was always, competitive. So I did athletics for a long time. I did competitive athletics for a long time, which I absolutely loved. I managed to sort of mix it all up.
Yeah. And as far as your parents were concerned, as long as you were getting good marks.
They didn't really seem to care a huge amount. So I didn't get much in the way of oversight. And I wouldn't say I got much in the way of, over love and affection either. I was pretty much left alone. And of course, my sister's 12 years older than I am. So by the time I was 13, she got married, about 13, 14 maybe. She was married and moved out. And I remember at the time being devastated,
Yeah, because it would have been quite lonely.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah, I was very lonely. Yeah. I felt like my childhood was lonely, actually, a lot of the time. But in a way, it also taught me a lot of resilience and a lot of understanding of myself. And even today, I like to be by myself. Not for huge periods of time, but I love it. I love being by myself and I enjoy it a huge amount. And it comes from that. I spend a lot of time by myself.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, because I guess you wouldn't have had cousins or any other family around.
No.
Did you go to a Jewish school?
Yeah, I went to Mount Scopus. I was subsidised fees because my parents couldn't afford the full fees, so that was good. And that was a good education. I didn't enjoy. I enjoyed the studying, but I didn't enjoy the school very much.
How come?
Mount Scopus is a school that attracts Jews who from all different parts of the community, but there's also a lot of extreme wealth and snobbery that goes along with that as well, and you kind of quickly work out your place in this sort of pecking order.
Huh. And because you were kind of the child of refugees or something.
Yeah, and parents were working class, hadn't been here all that long. So you certainly work out where you fit in the whole scheme of things. So I didn't enjoy that part of it. But I had lots of friends and lots of people I could go out with, and the sport was good, and I enjoyed the studying a great deal. So that part of it was really, really good. So it wasn't all bad or anything.
And at what point did you learn about World War II?
Oh, well, I didn't have to go very far because my father was a total addict of anything to do with World War II and the Holocaust. So there was always stuff on TV that he'd be watching or reading. And, in fact, I kind of grew up, like a lot of people at that time, the shadow of World War II and the Holocaust was very large in my life. It was enormous. Yeah, it was something that, was ever present.
And did you try to talk to your parents about it, or it was just a sense?
No, they didn't want to talk. My father would talk about it, but my mother never would. And
do you think she talked to him about it?
It's a very good question. I don't know. I doubt it. Yeah, she was pretty traumatised, and I don't think she ever really talked about it.
Mm. And so, other than going to university, did they have any other expectations of you, or did you have any expectations of yourself?
No, I wanted to go to university, and I wasn't at all sure what I wanted to do, and I ended up doing architecture simply because I was always good at, maths and physics. And I was also very interested in buildings and design. I figured, architecture sounds pretty good. So I did architecture at Melbourne Uni.
And
which I loved. I loved doing architecture. It was great. And I also, while I was there, it was just when computers were coming into use in architecture for design. So I started getting into programming then as well. And I really enjoyed that. And then I graduated during a recession, which was extremely unfortunate. And of course, architecture, construction engineering, always the first things that get hit when you have a recession. So I couldn't get a job, and I ended up getting a job in Alice Springs, working for a consulting company.
Wow.
So I moved to Alice Springs.
And were you excited to do that?
Yeah, I was actually, because I thought I'd never really been anywhere like that before. I knew nothing about it at all, except what you see on TV. And I went up there, and my first job was working on an Aboriginal community for the Bicentennial Authority, restoring Lutheran mission buildings at an Aboriginal community called Hermansburg. It's about 250 kilometres west of Alice Springs.
Huh.
And so I spent my first 6 or 9 months living at Hermansburg with an Aboriginal workforce and a whole bunch of tradesmen, working out how to restore these, 1870s, 1880s Lutheran mission buildings.
Why were they being restored?
For the Bicentennial Authority gave the Hermansburg community, it's called the Endaria Council, gave them a whole lot of money to restore all these buildings as part of the Bicentennial.
What's the Bicentennial?
200 years since European settlement, 1988.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
And then the buildings were used?
Yeah, the buildings had fallen into disrepair. There were a number of buildings. I mean, the whole story of Hermansburg and the settlement of Lutherans in northern South Australia and Central Australia is an extraordinary story all by itself.
What happened?
So the Lutherans that were mostly settled in South Australia, particularly around the Adelaide Hills and Adelaide, decided that they wanted to expand their mission into northern Australia and to convert Aboriginal people, First Nations people, to Lutheranism.
Huh.
So these guys got a whole bunch of camels, would you believe, and went out into the middle of the desert and converted Aboriginals to Lutheranism.
When was this happening?
1870s.
And the Lutherans, they'd come from Germany.
From being persecuted in Germany, they came to South Australia. I don't know exactly when. Probably sometime in the late 19th century.
Huh. Who were they persecuted by? Catholics?
Yeah, the Calvinists, I think. Don't quote me on that because I'm not too sure. But
And then there were practicing Indigenous Lutherans.
To this day, if you go to Hermannsburg on a Sunday morning and go to church, they will be singing hymns in Aranda. So the Lutherans translated the New Testament into Aranda, the Aboriginal language of that area.
Wow.
To this day, you will hear them sing.
How big's the community then?
I don't know. It's probably a few thousand, I think. It's not very big.
So they were happy to have their buildings restored because they were using them?
Yeah, I think they were pretty happy to have them restored. Yeah, they're actually being re-restored now. I was just reading about that.
And how did you find that experience?
Unbelievable. I'd never been to the outback. I'd never driven a four-wheel drive. I'd never driven on a dirt road like that before. And I'd never really experienced living with Aboriginals, yet alone Aboriginals in Central Australia. And so the whole thing was like just, it had a huge impact on me, enormous. And I became quite friendly with some of the people who were my age, the Aboriginal guys my age. And so I lived with them and, they taught me to hunt. So I used to go out hunting with them on weekends, taught me how to use a rifle. And it was that part of it I really, really enjoyed. It was a real insight, but it was really difficult work. It was hard. I had an Aboriginal workforce. I had to go and pick them up every day because, it's just the way it was. Couldn't expect them to rock up to work every day. I had to go and pick them all up at different houses all around the place. And, it was quite a growing up experience. I was only 24.
What were you hunting?
Kangaroos mainly.
And then would you eat them?
Yeah. Kangaroos and bustards, which are like bush turkeys.
Wow. And how was the community doing at that point?
Terrible. They still allowed alcohol at that time. I can't remember when that became a dry community. I think it might have been while I was there. But like the poverty, the kind of domestic violence, the general violence, the poor health of people there was just, like nothing I've ever seen. It's like being in a third world country. It was just shocking. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. But, then you'd see them in church on Sunday all singing beautifully and football, they love football. And every weekend there'd be a game of football against some other Aboriginal community. So they loved their Australian rules. So it wasn't all bad and the hunting was really good. And, I felt like we were teaching them trades and teaching them useful skills. But, people there died at a very young age. They still do. All the problems that we hear about on remote communities were all exactly that when I was there. It hasn't changed a huge amount.
And then where did you go after that?
Then I worked on the other side of the McDonnell Ranges. And I did some work for the Conservation Commission of the Northern Territory, planning out new parks and reserves. So a place called Altunga, which is an old gold mining area. So I did all the planning and supervision of the construction for Altunga. And then I went up to Litchfield and then up in the top end and worked on the planning of Litchfield Park, which the Northern Territory government decided to develop after the Commonwealth gave Kakadu back to the First Nations people. So they set up Litchfield as a direct competitor to Kakadu, which was kind of politically interesting. But I spent months out there planning out roads and buildings and walkways and all sorts of things.
And did you enjoy the work?
I loved it. It was fantastic. It was such a treat working in these, whether it was Central Australia or the top end. Working out in those places is just such a privilege. They're so beautiful and so wonderful, and to be able to experience them for so long is just terrific. And I still have a great love of both those areas. Central Australia and the top end. I think they're both just unique. Nothing like it anywhere else on the planet. And they're amazing places to go to. And then after that, I got a job back in Melbourne.
And did you meet Crystal when you...
Yes, when I came back.
Oh, not in the Northern Territory?
No, I didn't meet her in the Northern Territory. Despite the fact she grew up some of the time in Alice Springs, I didn't know her then. By then, we were both working for the Victorian government. So I was working for what was then the Historic Buildings Council of Victoria, and Crystal was working for Victoria Archaeological Survey. Oh, I should tell you, I did a master's in between all that. Between working here and leaving the Northern Territory, I went to the UK and did a master's in arts in architectural conservation at York University.
Huh. And how was that experience?
I loved it. It was great.
Why?
I loved the studying. The studying was fantastic. Living in the UK, it was during the Thatcher era. It was, not the best of times, especially in the north of England, because they were closing all the coal mines and there were protests everywhere and strikes all the time. And, if I put all that aside and I just focused on studying, I loved it. I had a great time. I rented a house in the Yorkshire Moors with a couple of other students, one from Finland and one from the Netherlands. And we had a great time. I had a fantastic year there. It was wonderful.
And why did you choose that?
Because at the time I'd been working, because I'd done all this work on these historic buildings in Altunga and in Hermannsburg and at Litchfield to some extent, I kind of thought, working on historic buildings seems like a good thing to do. I better go and do some more studying. So the best course in the world at that time was at York. So I got a Rotary scholarship from the Rotary Club of Alice Springs.
Wow.
And went to York. To study.
Amazing.
Yeah, and then I came back to Melbourne and worked for the Historic Buildings Council. And I was acting director for a year and a half of that. I was about 27, I think. And Crystal was at the same time acting director of the Victoria Archaeological Survey. So we were two young public servants who were both running statutory authorities. So we thought we were doing pretty good.
And what were you driven by at that point?
I think for me it was more about learning how government and politics and decision making occurs in the public sector. And I got a really good insight because I got to work with the minister and the minister's advisors and steer acts through Parliament and deal with a board of the Historic Buildings, the Council of the Historic Buildings Council, and all of my colleagues who are all in the planning department there, and city planning and how things work. So it was a terrific learning experience. It was absolutely fantastic thing to learn. But ultimately, I didn't think that it was for me, the public sector.
Why was that?
Too regimented, I think, and too... I got bored with it, I think. I think it was just, once I learned how everything works, it was kind of like, well, we're going to just keep doing this. And that was pretty short-sighted in a way because there were many, many other opportunities I could have pursued in the public sector. But at the time, my ambition exceeded my foresight, I think. And then I got a job at RMIT.
Doing what?
I was Associate Director of the National Key Centre for Design in the Faculty of Architecture and Design.
But overall, you were kind of pursuing interesting work, or what interests you?
Yeah, I've always been driven by... I haven't ever planned anything. It's just more like, this looks interesting, I'll go and do that and see what happens. And I've done that my whole life.
And you didn't feel any pressure from parents? Or
no, they felt their job was done.
Great.
They got me to university. It was kind of like, go and do. They were interested, but they didn't really care that much, I don't think. What I was doing.
And you weren't feeling like I need to go and, like, money wasn't the primary motivator or anything? No,
not at all. I mean, I always made reasonable money anyway, and I always felt like I had enough to meet all my needs, so I never really worried about it too much. I always felt like money had come as a consequence of doing the things I enjoyed and doing them well. So I never really chased the money. It was more the money followed. I always had faith that the money would follow.
That's great.
Yeah, so I found it, I just pursued things I found interesting. I didn't worry too much about where it would end up.
Mm-hmm. And did you have any other vision of your life in terms of having a family or anything like that? Or it was just like...
No, not really. Again, it was more like, if it happens, it happens. I didn't sort of think about it a great deal. It was only when I met Crystal and, we started getting serious, and then we thought we'd have a child. So we did. And it wasn't really, it wasn't nothing that, I don't think we ever just sat down and just sort of said, oh, this is what we want to do. I think we just felt like a natural thing to do. So we did it. And we didn't get married till after we had Nadia. So marriage wasn't really, a huge thing for us.
Huh. Why do you think that was?
I think part of it's growing up in the 1960s with all that, counterculture, not really counterculture, but sort of, there was a real rebellion in the 1960s and into the 70s against traditional norms of marriage and sexuality and drugs and all sorts of things. It was a direct reaction to the conservatism of in the 1950s, post-Second World War. And so you get all that sort of, cultural revolution stuff happening throughout the 60s. And I was very influenced by that. So I never thought that marriage was necessarily a good or bad thing. I just thought it's not necessary, really.
Huh. And did that fit in with the community you came from? Or it was like you didn't really care?
I didn't really care. It was of no consequence to me whatsoever what anyone else thought or the community thought. I was I was totally relaxed about that. Really, I've never really cared too much about what other people think. So it's a failing in some ways, but good thing mostly.
No, it's great. I feel like everything you're saying, it's like this is the key to living a happy life, is just pursuing what you're interested in, trusting money will come, like as long as obviously you're responsible and can feed yourself.
Yeah.
And then, not putting pressure on yourself, not trying to like conform to other people.
No, I've never felt like conforming. No. Even in my current role, I mean, I will often appear at work like this. Like I'm famous for just wearing black T-shirts all the time. Most of my colleagues wear proper shirts with collars and stuff.
Huh. There you go. So how did you end up moving into the digital stuff?
So when I was at RMIT, we were very focused on a lot of design for environment, design for manufacturing, and we were running a program in the National Key Centre that was focused. There was a number of these things at the time that were focused on getting a better fit between academia and industry. So making sure that academic research was industry focused. That was the thing about these national key centres. And at the time, the only people that had access to what was a precursor to the internet was academics. It was called the Australian Academic Research Network, and you could contact other academics using this very primitive user interface. It was just so arcane. And then the first browser came out, which would have been 1995, I'm thinking. Yeah, about May 1995, the first browser came out. Netscape, exactly. And I started thinking to myself, there's going to be money in this internet thing. And one of the companies I'd been doing research with, applied and given money to as a grant, was a company called Imaging Technologies, which had the idea, a guy called Gail Smith, was remanufacturing toner cartridges. And he hit on the idea that instead of carting them around in a car and dropping them off at various corporates, wouldn't it be an idea if you had a vending machine that was network connected that told you when it needed to be restocked and what it needed to be restocked with? Right. And he said to me, why don't you come and join me and we'll start this business? So I quit my job in academia and joined Gower in this imaging technologies thing. And we raised, I think, $40 million in venture capital. No, we raised a lot of money.
Really?
It was the early days of the internet, and it seemed to be, it was very easy to raise money. It just wasn't that difficult. It was like a boom period.
Huh, even in Australia?
We raised the first tranches in Australia from Starfish Ventures, and I can't remember who the other venture capital company was. And then with their help, we went to San Francisco and we raised more money there. This all happened over a period of a couple of years. And then Gower moved to San Francisco to set up the business there and threw his kids into boarding school.
Huh.
Which had many long-term ramifications. But anyway, and so he moved there and I used to fly backwards and forwards. This is when my kids were really, really young. And so it was a tough period, but very enjoyable. And we were on a real high, like it was the height of the internet boom. Money was flowing. We were setting up these machines. We got our first customer was Hewlett Packard, and we did trials with them. So Crystal and I and the kids went and lived in Tempe in Arizona for 6 months.
Wow.
To run the trials with Hewlett Packard at Arizona State University.
So where would the machines be?
They were in dorms and on the campuses in the union, what we would call the union buildings, but in the common areas. And the idea was that students who had run out of toner cartridge or inkjet cartridges, because those machines 24/7 and get them, and we'd monitor which ones they were taking, and then we'd restock according to the usage patterns. So you got to remember, internet was very, very young, yet alone networked vending machines. No one had ever done this before.
And people were printing stuff all the time.
Of course, people were printing all the time, as they
and
did back in the day.
Students had printers in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Huh. And you would physically be going and restocking it?
I did for a while there, yeah. Yeah, and when we were in Arizona, I did, yeah, absolutely. Because we had to prove the model to HP before they would agree to expand it around the US.
And it worked?
Yeah, it did work. It worked really, really well. The company is now called Zoom Systems. So that we've got the 10 major airports in the US have all got them there. You may even have seen them if you've walked through San Francisco Airport or Los Angeles or Atlanta. You'll see them. You can buy things like mobile phones. So they're high-value products in the main. You can get headphones, phones, charging units, all sorts of things.
Oh, this is what it's evolved into.
Yes, it's what it's evolved in, yeah, over the years. And it sells all Apple products in Macy's. So the only way in all Macy's stores have these machines. It does cosmetics, all sorts of things, all sorts of high-value products.
Huh.
And the companies also pay for the analytics because it gives them an insight into the demographics of purchases in different places and how much people are spending and where they're spending and what they're buying. So they also pay for the analytics for these things as well as the products.
Huh. But wouldn't they get the analytics just through normal point of sale?
They do as well, but this gives them... With the point of sale, you take up a lot of space and you need people. These machines just sit there with a fairly small footprint and they're in places where you haven't got a presence. So rental car agencies, airports, selling products where a store maybe doesn't have enough room to stock them, all those sort of things. I haven't had much to do with the company for a very long time.
Huh. So at that point in your life, you were ready to take on a lot of risk and go and do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And what was your thinking, like, if it doesn't work out? Or
then I'll go back to academia. That was my thinking, is that I'll go back to academia, but I want to do this. So, I remember at the time, it was a very risky thing to do. But it's something I really wanted to do. I was very passionate about it, and it was kind of... I was vice president of R&D, so my focus was very much on the technology, not the sales part. And it was all new. No one had ever done this before. So I've got, I think, 5 patents. So I'm co-inventor on 5 patents from that era. Because we were inventing stuff that no one had ever done before. No one had ever strung all this stuff. I mean, it sounds really sort of mundane today, but at the time, no one had done it.
And did that come naturally to you?
Well, I employed a lot of people who knew how to put it all together, but I managed the whole thing. So I helped with the capital raising and then all of the logistics and organising and project management. I did all of that. And put the whole thing together so that it worked.
And you were just learning.
We were all learning. We were all learning because no one had done it before. We made a lot of mistakes. We learned a lot. And at the time, the way the technology sector worked with new products is you'd go to Germany, to Hanover every year to an exhibition called CeBIT in Hanover. So we used to go to Hanover every year with these machines that weighed, 800 kilograms. They were absolutely enormous. I'd have to ship them over to Hanover, unpack them, fix them because they'd always break. Something would break on the way over. And that's how we made most of our sales, was going to this trade show in Germany. It's how we got HP in the first place.
You met them there?
Yeah. It was where everybody in the IT sector would go to see what's new on the market and to do deals.
Wow. So you were just able to learn, because this is like totally different from the work doing building, restoration stuff.
Yeah. Totally different.
But you just picked it up.
Yeah. I just picked it up and ran with it. Yeah.
Cool. And you just weren't worried, like, if it doesn't work, I'll get another job.
I'll find something else to do.
Because with 2 little kids as well.
Yeah, 2 little kids and a huge mortgage, yeah.
Was Crystal chill about it?
No, I don't think she was chilled about it. I mean, she was supportive but nervous, I think. Yeah, it's a good thing it all worked out, or I never would have heard the end of it, really.
At what point did it become clear that it was, I guess once you got the HP deal?
Once we got HP and then Gower moved to the US, and he's a great salesman. He's just one of the best. And things started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then he cut a deal with Sanyo to do all the hardware, because for a long time we were doing our own hardware. We're actually bending metal and putting all the machines together. And then he cut a deal with Sanyo, and then things really took off from there. But then, it went under in 2001 when the internet crashed, the bubble burst, and we ran out of money in 2001. And that's when I left. Gower bought all the assets of the business back for like 2 cents in the dollar or something.
Off you?
Off the venture capitalists. By then I was out. So he bought all the assets back and restarted the company and got more capital and made it really successful. And he's lived in San Francisco in this most beautiful building ever since.
So are you annoyed that you tapped out, or you don't really care?
No, I'd moved on by then. I don't look back too much. I'd moved forward. I wished him every success. I'm still good friends with him, and Nadia used his holiday house in Mendocino when she was studying at Berkeley. And Nadia and I had dinner with him on his rooftop Japanese garden terrace when we were in San Francisco while she was at Berkeley. So, yeah, we're still good friends.
Yeah. So then what was next for you?
Then one of the companies that I'd employed to do the software for these machines was a company called Aspect Computing, which at the time was Australia's largest homegrown IT company. And I'd worked with them, and the CEO of that is a legendary woman called Lindsay Catamol. And Lindsay said, "Why don't you come and work for me in sales?" She said, "I think you'd be really good at sales." And I said, "Okay." And so then I did business development and sales there for, I think, 4 years. And I did my MBA there. So they paid for me to do my MBA. So I did my MBA at the Australian Graduate School of Management during that period as well, which was one of the best things I've ever done, I have to say. But I learned all about business development and sales while I was there. I got really sort of into the whole pipeline and dealing with customers. I managed the relationship with IBM and Sun Microsystems. And so I learned a lot about that side of the business.
What was so good about the MBA?
There was a lot of gaps in my knowledge. Like I'd never really done accounting or marketing, those sort of things. And so I felt like they were real gaps. And so the MBA really plugged a lot of those gaps, and strategy, all those sort of things I'd never really touched. That's why I did it, and I loved it. I had a great time, and I've still got heaps of friends from doing my MBA. It was a great time. I did it part-time, which was almost killed me. Because I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning before the kids got up to sort of study, and then work, and then do that, and then do it on weekends. And it was a hard 5 years, that one. I remember those being particularly difficult. Yeah.
And did you enjoy sales?
Loved it. Yeah. It's good. I love talking to people and persuading people, and I found I was really good at it, and I really did enjoy it. And it was a great skill to learn as well. And a lot of the more senior people at Aspect, were terrific. They were really, really good, and they taught me a lot.
I'm just thinking the diversity of work experience you've had from public sector, full
academia,
tech startup, academia.
Yeah.
Consulting work to then because then you'd be back in an office presumably or sales. Are you out visiting clients a lot?
No, they didn't want to see you in the office. It was one of Lindsay's things is don't want to see you in the office. If you're in sales, you're out there with customers, not in the office. Don't want to see you. In fact, there weren't enough desks for everyone. Deliberately. And every Wednesday morning at 8 a.m. we'd sit around a table, the sales team, with Lindsay and the guy who was chief, who was CEO, was a guy called Ian Farrington. And you'd have to say how many deals you've cut, what you had in the pipeline. You were held to account. And I learned a lot about accountability from Lindsay. Your feet were held to the fire every Wednesday. You'd better have something to say for yourself.
And did you like that?
Yeah. I thought it was great because you learned about accountability and you learned about performance in a way that was very tangible. Like she made you feel it. You were part of the business, your job. She'd say things like, each one of you is responsible for keeping 12 people employed every day. That's your job. Go out and sell.
Cool.
Yeah.
And you were obviously up to the challenge.
Absolutely loved it. It was great. It's one of the best times of my career. I learned so much during that period. It was intense and it was hard. We got paid extraordinarily well. I mean, we got paid just like, even in today's money, would be considered great money. We got paid really, really well, and the bonuses were just extraordinary. So you got well rewarded for your effort, but you had to perform.
Yeah. And presumably not everyone makes it.
No, you were cut fairly quickly if you didn't perform.
Huh. So did you get up to speed quickly?
Yes. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And
I liked it. I liked the competitive nature of it. I really enjoyed that.
Huh.
And I had to wear a suit and tie. Yeah, which I did not like at all. Still don't like it.
Huh. So you weren't... So how did you learn the persuasion stuff? You just learnt by doing it?
Yeah, first you go out with more senior people, sit in on their conversations, and then you go out and do it yourself, and you either sank or swam. That was the attitude at Aspect. You sink or you swim. Go out there and do it.
And what do you think it takes to be successful in that role?
I think empathy with the people you're dealing with and a genuine wish to understand what their motivations are and what they're trying to achieve, and to understand that at a really deep level, and then generally trying to find what you can do to help them meet their aspirations and what they're being measured by. So it's not about you, it's about them. And I think also that's the key to all sales, all relationships in a way, is, having that sense of empathy and understanding and a natural curiosity doesn't hurt. If it comes to you naturally, it's much, much easier and much more authentic when you're talking to people, and people feel that. So you can be successful by being yourself, really, if that's your natural state. But it doesn't suit everybody, right? You've got to have a personality that is like that in the first place.
Huh. But you can probably learn, right?
You never be great. You might be good, but you won't be great.
Huh. If you're not naturally interested in people.
Yeah. You've got to be interested in people and in a genuine way, and interested in their problems and interested in what they need to be successful, and then working out how you can help them be successful. And that's something that, you've got to be genuine about that.
Mm.
You might be okay, but you'll never be great. And we get measured on, how many millions of dollars of sales we made.
Mm.
That's what you get measured by. So it was very competitive.
Yeah, but basically you've got to put, for the interaction, like you're putting the selling bit aside and you're just focusing on that.
Don't worry about the money. Worry about solving their problem, helping the customer solve whatever their problem is and understanding that problem. And then pricing it according to the value you're creating for them. Because if you understand their problem, what it's worth to them, it's much easier to price the value of what you're selling.
Mm.
You can work through what the inputs are, how many hours, how many people, what sort of computers you need, and all that sort of stuff. That's the mechanics part of it. But the margin is in the value, right? Not in the time or the physical resources. So understanding what they are is just good business. Then you can price to the value you're creating for them.
Yeah. Which means basically charging the maximum amount that they will pay.
The maximum the customer will bear, exactly.
Huh. And you just kind of had a knack for getting it.
Yeah, I could work all that out, by understanding what they were trying to achieve and how they were trying to achieve or what it was worth to them. Why were they doing this? Why were they embarking on this project?
And it was IT systems you were selling?
Yeah, software. It was either bespoke software or customised proprietary software. So we'd often sell IBM software and IBM hardware, or Sun Microsystems hardware and Sun Microsystems software, and Microsoft as well. I actually ran their training. I forgot about that. I ran the training area for a while. Back in the day, we used to have Microsoft trainers, and I ran that business. So companies would send their people along to learn about how to program in all these Microsoft languages and with all these Microsoft products. I ran the training business for a while. That was fun.
Oh. And so how did you get to know the CEO who hired you?
Because I dealt with her when I employed Aspect to develop the software for the vending machines. And so I got to know her through that. She invested in the company as well. She was one of the investors.
Huh. Okay, and then...
So then one of the main software engineer who'd worked for Aspect Computing on the vending machines started his own business, and he asked me to come and join him in a software engineering business, more consulting and software development. So I did that with someone called Magnus Cameron, a company called Hot Magna. And we set out to build that company to sell. We both decided this wasn't going to be something we built up for our children, but something we build and deliberately sell it when the time was right.
Huh. And you were ready for the next adventure or something?
Yeah, I wanted to do something else, and this sounded really, really tempting. It was another big, risky move. And so Magnus and I were co-CEOs, and we employed, I think we got up to about 40 people. I can't remember now, about 40 people. And we had an office in Cremorne, what's now Cremorne, was back it's still called Richmond then. And then we built up that business largely around doing work for toll holdings, transport, logistics. So we did a lot of work for toll, and we subcontracted to Sun Microsystems and did a lot of development work for their customers as well.
Huh. So you were developing software?
Yeah, we were building software. We had a whole bunch of software engineers.
And how did the toll relationship come about?
Magnus had knew someone there who said, can you write this little bit of software? And it kept growing and growing and growing. It just got bigger and bigger. And they said, can you guys do this? It just evolved over time. till they became a major customer. And then we started diversifying, because you can't just have one customer. We needed more. So that was my job, was basically grow the business and diversify it, which I did.
And you just wanted to grow and sell something for fun?
We grew we just thought, let's try and make some money here. Let's grow it and position it for sale so it was attractive, which we did. And then we sold it to a listed company called Hyro Limited, which back in the day was probably one of the leading digital agencies around, and they were looking to expand into software, and they wanted some more software engineering capability. So we sold the company to them.
With the team?
With the team.
And not contracts?
Yeah, and all the contracts. We kept the name. We kept the actual business name, and we sold that. Sold it to them, and then we were bonded there for 2 years before we could get our money out. And our money was all in shares in Hyro, ASX Hyro shares.
Huh.
So our money was on the share price there.
And were you happy with that?
No, and we hated working there. Both Magnus and I absolutely loathed working there. So, and then just so happened, one of those strokes of fortune, that Macquarie Bank wanted to buy into the company about the time that our 2 years was coming up. And they approached all the executives and said, well, if anyone wants to sell the shares, we'll buy them. So I did an off-market transaction with Macquarie and sold everything.
Great.
To Macquarie, and then resigned as soon as the day I hit my 2 years.
Great.
And remember, we went to Spain?
Yeah.
That's straight after that.
Really?
Yeah, it was straight after that happened.
Huh.
That was exactly why I did it. We went to Spain. I thought, I'm free, I have money, I don't have to work for these guys. Let me out.
And it was set up so the business could still function and do well.
Hyro fell down and collapsed sometime after that. Again, I didn't pay much attention. People always used to ask me, said, oh, well, what happened with Hyro? What happened with this? And I said, I don't know.
Yeah, not if you don't have any money in it as well.
I don't care anymore. I cared for 2 years. Now I don't care at all. Like, it was a thing that needed to be done. But that's all it was. But
it went fine for a while until that happened.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how they managed to fuck it all up, but they did eventually. It all collapsed in a heap. But, didn't worry me in particular. I don't mind.
And then what was next after that chapter?
Then
how many years did that take?
So that was probably... The whole hot magnet thing was probably no more than 4 or 5 years. And then I took some time off. About the time we were in Spain, I took some time out and I did some consulting work for a Chinese IT company that wanted to set up in Australia. And so I went to China quite a lot there to see how they worked.
How did you meet them?
So one of the people that had invested in us was I suppose a private equity firm called Map Venture Partners, and I'd stayed in touch with those guys, and they gave me an office because I felt like I needed somewhere to work, and so they gave me and Magnus an office, and someone that they knew someone at this company in China, and they were looking for someone to help them set up in Australia. So I said, yeah, that sounds interesting, I'll do that. So, we helped them get established in Australia. That was a bit of a sideline. It was just a novelty thing to do to fill in some time really. And then about the time we were in Spain, I got contacted by a friend of mine that worked for WSP and said, we keep acquiring these companies. We've got all this software and all these software people, and we're looking for someone to look at it all and give us a strategy about what we do with it. Would you be interested? So I flew from Madrid to London and met with the board of what was then WSP Environment and Energy and spoke to them, and then they gave me the gig consulting, and then they said, okay, do you want to implement it? And that was how I started at WSP in October 2009. And the rest is kind of history, so I've just kept building that business ever since in all sorts of different ways. Yeah, and lots of changes in WSP, lots and lots.
And during that transition bit, were you worried about what you were going to do next, or you just knew?
No. By then I'd made enough money that actually money was no longer such an issue. And I sort of thought, but on the other hand, I didn't want to do nothing either. I'm too active. You know, I didn't want to do nothing for any length of time. I got a bit bored too. You know. And
did you know that would happen?
Yeah, absolutely. But I thought at the time, I need a bit of time out. But then, you know, after I'd had a little bit of time out, I started getting pretty restless. There's only so many motorcycles and cars one can play with, really. And that's not, at the end of the day, not all that fulfilling either. So when the opportunity came up at WSP, I thought, yeah, that sounds like fun. And that has been. It's been a great ride. I've had the opportunity to work in all sorts of weird and wonderful places and work on some terrific projects and work with some great people. And the company's changed hugely over that period. It's enormous change.
So you're clearly very adaptable to be able to switch from like working for yourself to working for someone else.
I'm not
to fully entrepreneurial to.
Yeah, I'm pretty adaptable. Yeah, I'm adaptable. That's not just with work; it's with most things.
Huh. So you were fine slotting back into a more corporate culture.
Yeah. I'd never worked for such a big corporate. I mean, even when I started WSP, it was 15,000 people. It's now 70-something thousand people. It's huge. I mean, it's like, you know, $23 billion market cap company. It's enormous.
Mm. It's Canadian, right?
Yeah. Headquartered in Montreal, listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
one of the biggest engineering companies.
It is the biggest now, biggest engineering company globally.
Yeah, so that's massive change.
Huge, yeah.
Is there anything you have? It's like big corporate, startup, academia, public sector. I feel like you have to become like a rabbi and then you've covered everything.
I'm not going to do that. That ain't going to happen. Although I was president of the Leo Beck Centre for Progressive Judaism.
Okay.
I did do that. That's about as close as I'll ever get. It wasn't very religious. It was more administrative. But, I mean, I think, as I said before, you know, I've just seen things that were interesting that I thought I'd enjoy and just gone and done that, not worried too much. You know, and just have faith in myself that I'll work it out as I go, which I mostly have been okay at.
Yeah. And that's kind of it's as long as the work's interesting, you're happy to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as it's interesting, yeah.
And
it's not interesting, I'll stop.
And you can always trust the next interesting thing will turn up.
There'll be something else. There's always many interesting things around.
Yeah.
Although as I get older, you know, like the opportunities to pursue interesting things are probably going to be limited not by me, but by other people's perceptions of age.
Huh. But then you can just do your own thing again.
Yeah, I'll find something. Yeah. But, you know, like, and then there's the question, how long do I want to keep on working? Well, you know, as long as I'm enjoying it, I'll keep going. And I've got time to do all the other things I'm interested in doing, you know, like travel and motorcycling. And, you know, I've always got many little projects on the side that I'm working on. So, you know, as long as got space for that, I'm happy.
And is what you've wanted for your children the same thing you think is what your parents wanted for you?
Oh, I'd like to think that they had a little bit more love and care and attention than I got. Hopefully they agree with that. Yeah. And I just want them to be happy, do their own thing and, you know, lead a good life, be good people. So, and they are. They're both fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they've definitely got the love.
Yeah.
And this is the bit that will be so embarrassing for Nadia. But
I don't think that's that embarrassing. Yeah.
I mean, for me to say, but it is like, so it's like you're her number one fan. It's like, so she knows that and knows how supported and loved she is, which is great. Which probably maybe you have to go through not being a bit deprived of that to then realise it's important to
Yeah, maybe. Not consciously, but, I think both Chris and I, because of the way we both grew up, very conscious to, we want to show our children a lot of love and care and help them in any way we could, because we didn't get that.
Mm. Okay, I know you have a meeting,
yeah,
so
I do too.
Last quick questions. How do you stay grounded?
Oh, easy. Exercise. I'm a total fanatic. I go every morning. I do weight training and cardio every single morning at 5:45, and I work myself very, very hard. That's how I stay sane. Is really doing that. I love exercise. I'm addicted to it. I absolutely adore it.
Great.
I'd do more if I thought I could get away with it, but my body won't take much more. I'm sore most of the time.
Not a bad thing to be addicted to. Is there a book that's had a big impact on your life?
Ooh. When I was younger, I read a lot of Elie Wiesel books. About, have you heard of Elie Wiesel? He wrote a lot about the Holocaust. He was a Holocaust survivor. And because I'd grown up with this big shadow, there's a kind of underlying need to sort of get a better understanding of it. And he wrote the most amazing books about his experience. And he was I think he lived in Italy. But yeah, so his books, and the other one that I always remember reading when I was much younger is Thomas Hardy. I used to love Thomas Hardy books, just the narrative in them and the vivid pictures it created. And I still like those 19th century authors a great deal. It's not very fashionable, but I still like them a great deal.
Great.
Yeah.
Last question.
Yeah.
What 3 words describe the best version of you?
Focused, fit, smiling.
Great. Thanks so much.
That's all right. My pleasure. That was fun.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, feel free to share it with someone. And also, a random 23-year-old just messaged me on Instagram and told me he found the podcast through the algorithm. So it actually does help if you review the podcast and subscribe or follow. And then you get to find out about future episodes as well. Review or rate, you know what I mean. Anyway, it would truly make my day. So thank you in advance.